and welcome back to another episode of Tech Pro Unicorn Podcast. I am your host, Michael Grace. Today, we are going to talk about plants, and that might sound out of context, but I want you to bear with me a little bit. This is a very cool episode where we're going to learn from plants. We're going to learn how to understand plants, communicate with plants, and to do so, because I'm obviously not the expert in that field, we have brought I'm gonna try this name, and I love unique names. Everybody who knows this podcast knows I love unique names. So we have Tigrilla Gardenia, and she is going to be our guest today. I'm going to read her bio. It's very cool. Fascinated by nature since her earliest memories, Tigrilla has turned that passion into her vocation. Her journey began in a polytechnic childhood. She earned a degree in music and electrical engineering. Now I understand why you were geeking out over the sound levels when we got started. Entering the high-tech corporate world via RealNetworks and Microsoft in the early days of the internet, the desire to escape the confines of the corporate world proved too strong, and she soon began following her own spiritual path. She co-owned a circus. That's something we have to talk about. Produced intentional dance events, taught Kabbalah, and even toured with Cirque du Soleil. Today, she works as a nature-inspired mentor, leadership coach, studies plant intelligence and the effects of plant music on human health. She has the honor of being help me with this, a Damanhur.
A Damanhur, you said it perfect.
There we go. Citizen in Italy, one of the largest spiritual eco-communities in the world. Her roots are firmly planted in the arts, communication, and the avant-garde. She uses her expertise to empower mission-driven leaders to achieve personal and professional success by integrating nature-inspired innovation in order to bring meaning to life and make an impact with work. She's an influential speaker and mentor, running courses and workshops on reconnection with the plant kingdom. Always eager to learn, she studied with some of the greatest minds in bio-inspired sciences, gaining a master's degree in Futuro Vegetale. I'm gonna like flare it a little bit. At the University of Florence, she also studied Ooh, you're challenging me today. Biomimicry.
Perfect.
Mimicry. Okay, mimicry for social innovation and product development. She's a world ambassador for plant intelligence and champions connections to nature as the basis for long-term health, happiness, and success. Awesome. Thank you for joining me and taking the time. And you're joining from across the pond, I believe.
I am. And thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes, I am in northern Italy, which is what we call the first city of Damanhur.
I love it. Before we started the podcast, I was sharing, I'm super excited because my first trip to Europe is to Italy with my wife. We're staying in Rome, and we were having a great little discussion around, Rome and in Italy and what to see and where to go and how not to get, be silly and be a silly American in Italy. So thank you for taking the time. What really caused me a lot of interest. Many of you know I have a big part of me that's Native American. I have a spirit animal, which is the wolf. I've gone on all kinds of journeys to understand that, to really ensure that was my spirit animal and to learn from that. And those of you that want to follow along at home, if you just search her name, which is spelled a little different. So I'm going to spell it real quick, and this is important if you're following along at home. It's Tigri. I want to make sure I get this right.
You got it.
Illa, and then the last name, Gardenia, just like you expect it to be spelled. If you go to that website, you can kind of follow along because there's a really cool part of that website where you can take a quiz and find out what your spirit wild plant is. And it's just so cool because you go through, it's only 8 questions. It's not like, I've got to block 30 minutes out of my life to go do this. You learn a little bit about really cool plants, but you learn a little bit about yourself too. So talk to me about how you found out that plants were your thing.
Ooh, this is a fun one. So, like you said, I live in this place that I often called Hogwarts for adults. That's what I call Damanhur, because that's what it is. I mean, where else can you live your life mixed with, all this magic and underground cathedral and underground temples of humankind? I highly encourage you to go and do a web search on Damanhur if you haven't seen it. But in Damanhur, one day I was walking in our capital, and I was walking down and I heard this music. Now, again, like you said, I'm a music engineer. I've done a lot of other things in between, but music is still kind of my way of relating to the world. And I heard this music, and it was like no music I had ever heard before. So I followed the sound and I got to a box, and I was like, what the heck is this? And there was a speaker and there was this box. And then I followed the box, like the cables that were connected to the box, and they were connected to a plant. And forget it, mind blown right there. So basically, this device called the Music of the Plants, which now is a much smaller box, is one of the first instruments, like musical instruments for plants. And it allows plants to really control the notes, make a melody, and pretty much compose music live. And I was listening to this music, and it was as if the plant was talking to me. Like I could easily just understand something more. And that was what I say the beginning of my plant reawakening journey. Like some people say they're having a reawakening. Mine is a plant reawakening, because we mainly suffer from what's called plant blindness. And plant blindness is a scientific term that is all about the fact that even though we sort of see plants, we really don't. And we don't see their value and their true integration and experience in our society. And so with this device, I was able to start really stepping closer into this relationship and develop this way of being able to now really see plants in all their settings and their importance for us as humans.
I love it. It's funny, right? Because people, we listen to dolphins and the sounds that all the mammals make, and I think we think, just what comes to mind is we think things have to be moving to be alive, right? Like right. There has to be motion and movement. But then when you look at a plant, it's obviously alive. It's growing. It's going through cycles and such. So why wouldn't it, have the same characteristics as other living things, right? And emit its own sounds and such. What a cool discovery, right?
Well, to just absolutely. And a lot of it relates to the fact that we as human beings tend to look for things that have other beings that have similar characteristics to us in order to be able to relate to them. So a lot of the different, dolphins or, dogs or cats or whatever have similar features, or, they have noses, they have eyes, they also have brains. And so that's really what we describe as intelligence under. We think of it in that way. But what we've learned over the last 15, 20 years in the scientific world is the fact that plants are actually highly intelligent. Plants have the ability to make conscious decisions. They can look at information that they encounter in their environment and then make a decision. And even when it comes to movement, it's visible movement. Like you said, plants are always in motion. They're always moving. It's just that they move at a rate that's way smaller. But if you spend as much time as I do, for example, with plants, like I have a cactus that's in front of me that throughout the course of the day, the cactus is always changing direction. Or, orchid that right now I'm watching as the flowers are slowly, opening. Those leaves, those plants, they're constantly reacting to their environment. And those reactions are actually not that different from us, except for that they don't have the same societal cultural filters that have plagued us and make us always second doubt ourselves and, worry about whether or not we're doing things right.
I love it. Growing up on the western part of the United States, there's all kinds of we're dealing with forest fires and, which is just horrible for the trees and the plants in the ecosystem. And we were, in a burn area in northern Arizona. We just north of Flagstaff. There was a large fire, two large fires that kind of joined and just devastated the forest land up there. And it was weird. We were driving by, and I was like, "Look, there's this one tree that didn't burn, right? It just somehow everything around it was scored earth and this one tree or these couple plants. And you're just like, how did they do that? Right? How did they survive that crazy temperature and what must have been this inferno kind of surrounding? And they came out just fine, right? Like, and I'm sure will be the source of growth and regrowth in that forest area.
Not only that, I mean, there is that, which is years and years of relationship with fire. As you said, being, partly Native American, we know that Indigenous peoples have worked alongside of nature with fire for so long. And actually, there are some areas that burn in the dangerous ways that they burn now because they have not been burned in a long time. And there are many plants that have strong relationships to fire. There are types of pines, for example, that the cones won't open for the seeds unless there's a fire. There are many types of grasses that require fire periodically in order for them to spring anew. So those trees also have developed all these mechanisms that are reactions, to what happens, learning. And we do know that from season to season, plants actually can remember. So if the temperature was scorching hot, they will remember that the year before was really hot, and they have developed certain new mechanisms. And generation over generation over generation, they'll be able to resist a lot of those temperatures. And these are a lot of the lessons that we have forgotten as human beings. The whole premise of passing on certain types of knowledge, of thinking of ourselves more than just one lifetime, even within one lifetime, thinking of ourselves as seasonal beings, of allowing our bodies to adapt to environment rather than always making the environment try to adapt to us. Because we can resist more warmth, we can resist so many other things if we allow our bodies to acclimate over time, but we just don't. We just don't give ourselves that permission. So the beauty of plants is that they actually have they don't have one thing that we think of as a strength, which can be a strength in certain ways, but in another way has a huge weakness. We as human beings run away. We run away from our problems. We run away from situations. They can't, so they have to adapt.
I love it. Yeah, when you think about learning from plants, my initial thought is they're always so, what I would say, peaceful, right? They're always they're always just there. They're always calm. They're slower moving. And to me, right, someone who's like, I just bounce throughout the day, meeting to meeting to meeting, craziness all over. I go home, I have kids, I have, family commitments. And I'm just like, I always say, I just run 110% until I just collapse, right? I'm just exhausted. And when I look at a plant, I'm like, wow, what would it be like to be a plant? To just, to just exist and grow and provide, air and do this such meaningful thing and just slow down, right? And just be in your surrounding. Like, that's just a lesson that I look at a plant and I'm like, I could learn from you.
Absolutely. And I'll expand the metaphor a little bit because it's a wonderful metaphor. All those things that you mentioned, things like, okay, so working or having children or, having to care for people around you, plants do all the same thing. We know that plants actually can recognize their kin, so they can recognize their children. They know which ones in a forest area, specifically like big trees, know which one are their children and make sure that those children have kind of a little bit of a head start on some of the others. And at the same time, it's really important for a plant. It's much more obvious, you could say, to a plant or understandable to a plant, the idea that a plant is both an individual as well as part of an ecosystem. Again, another one of those things that we as humans have kind of forgotten. So the healthier the ecosystem is, the healthier the plant is, but the healthier the plant is, the healthier they can make the ecosystem. So there's a continuous back and forth. So like you said, there is a slower pace, but also there's a deeper understanding that we have to learn how to interrelate. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't wars, because wars do happen. There's parasitic plants and there's, predation, and there's all kinds of situations that happen. But a plant also knows that if they use too much of their energy, they're going to fall over and they're going to die. So it's really important for the plant to, again, measure out how much do I have? Where am I getting my nourishment from? How do I grow towards the sun? How do I ensure that the others around me that create the healthy environment also have what they need? There's a lot of lessons that are really interesting about how to use your energy wisely, how to conserve when it's important, how to give when it's important, how to keep an eye on what's happening outside of yourself while checking in and making sure your self-care is high. It's really opens up an entire new way of us. And it's really not a new way. It's an old way. It's ways that our indigenous, ancestors knew how to be. It was like I say, we have to reawaken our plantness. We have to reawaken to our internal nature, our true nature, so that we can then go back to saying, if I'm in harmony with my environment, what does that mean? How do I act? And how does then in turn my environment support that and thrive and flourish while I'm thriving and flourishing within it?
I love that. I never thought about a plant, creating a family essentially, and then caring for a family. And what you just described, right? Like just the awareness is something that humans can totally translate to, right? I think we're all trying to be better humans. We're all trying to be more aware, right? Especially given the current times in the world, right? I think we could all stand to just be more aware of the other humans on the planet and grow closer to them and get more connected to them. How about in times of crisis, right? Like the forest fire thing to me is always, whenever there's a fire, I'm always like, oh my gosh, the plants, the trees, the animals, that whole ecosystem. The fire's kind of natural. People react to it because they're like, oh my gosh, or maybe we built houses where perhaps we shouldn't have, and we built them in forested land. And they were like, that house. I'm like, that house shouldn't have been there. Mother Nature's just got a wicked sense of humor. And she's
exactly.
like, you shouldn't be here. But, how do plants deal with that kind of, whether it's that crisis or, I just planted lemon trees in the heat of summer, and I was like, oh my gosh, these poor plants, they're going to be in shock. I got to deep water them. And I'm like, how do I care for my 3 lemon trees that I just planted in the heat of summer? Because I'm such a bad plant owner. Right. I was like, how do I care for them and let them know, like, I care for you. I love you. I want you to grow. I'm sorry I took too long to plant you. But, how do they deal with like that trauma and crisis oftentimes that we create for them?
Oftentimes it's true. We do create it. And you just, in some ways, so there's a lot of different steps. The first thing that's really great with the way plants and a lot of animals, to be honest, work is in the sense that they have a lot of what's called feedback loops. They have a lot of ways of understanding and creating mechanisms to be able to understand and register what's happening around them. For example, plants have the same 5 senses that we do. So, taste and smell and sight and everything, but they have about another 15 other senses that we know of. And this allows them to be finely tuned to their environment and understand, because we use the word nature sometimes, but really what we're talking about is environment, right? The area around which I live. So first and foremost, most plants are highly attuned and understand, so they can then create these feedback loops that helps them see what's coming. And this is what we think of as forethought, but it's because they're looking at minute changes and understandings and then able to then make adjustments. In the moment of an impact, something that happens, like you said, a crisis out of the blue in some aspects, and they couldn't have seen it, what happens is most plants will retreat they will look at and take assessment. Where am I? What do I have around me? And this is what happens a lot in forest fires. For example, many plants go under. They take everything that is necessary, sugars and, minerals and water especially, and everything, and they grab it and they suck it down into the root system. So they have this sort of dual way of living that gives them the opportunity to really suck that down in and then assess. okay, what's happening above ground? What is it that I need to do in order to then come back and to nourish? And then the other thing that is so one lesson for us to remember is we tend to try to act in the moment of a crisis when it's much better to stop and assess. Much better for you to take that time and that pause and really understand what's happening before you make a knee-jerk reaction that can actually cause more harm than good. So that's one thing. And then the next piece in it is plants aren't as afraid as human beings to let go of something that's lost. So a limb is too much and or a set of leaves have been too damaged. I'm going to pull back and I'm going to drop those because there's a trust that the overall life of the plant, whether it's a tree or a shrub or a bush, is more important than one individual little piece, where we sometimes get very attached to individual pieces and will hold on to them. So there's a lot of different lessons like that. The other thing is there's a lot of cooperation. When it comes time for the forest to come back, you have to remember that pollinators tend to be, birds or wind or other things. And so plants need to look to the overall environment. And yes, they have to assess their own selves, but then they have to assess what's around. Okay, who's around? Who needs water? Who needs potassium? Who needs nitrates? Nitrogen? Who needs this? Who needs that? And then let's see what we got. And then let's see how this stuff goes out in a way. And sometimes that does mean making hard decisions. That sometimes means looking at an overall area and again saying, all right, I'm going to shut down. And that's where their relationship with seeds and with the future generations are also very helpful in thinking about it. We tend to think about reincarnation, but then we get really scared and don't really believe in it at some points. So it's things like that. So there's, both physical perspectives of stop, assess, look and see what I need, drop what may not be needed, make a strategic plan, start looking at what the resources are, look at what the overall environment is, and then start moving things. And then a lot of trial and error. That's another piece that plants are really good at. Let me try something for a while, maybe a season. Okay, that worked, that didn't work. Let me make shifts because of those feedback loops that they have in place.
Wow. It's almost, it's a great lesson, right? To me, my head, as somebody who served in the military, I was like, wow, the military kind of does that, right? Mm-hmm. When you're in a combat situation, or maybe you get surprised on a convoy, you stop and you assess, okay, what's the damage? What's the threat?
Exactly.
Right? You're doing all this assessment, and then what do I have? What resources? Exactly what you said, right? I think our military does it. I think a lot of successful companies do it. I think the companies that hold on too long, right? Like take Sears and Roebuck as a great example, right? the number one largest, department store, the number one retailer in the world. And they're not even here anymore because they didn't do exactly that, right? They held on to the leaf just too long, right? Or the branch, because it really needed to just go. And they needed to pivot and try something different, and they just wouldn't, right?
Right. And that's where those feedback loops are so important, right? What are the indicators that help me better understand what's happening in my landscape? And how do I then adjust to the changes that are happening?
Historically, right, most of our medicines come from plants, right? I mean, going all the way back to the founding fathers or the native peoples that roamed the land, right? They were very in tune with what plants they could use for various purposes. Now we've kind of taken those plants and we've prophetized it like we always do, right? We have to, can't just take anything natural. We've got to go through this process and crush it and grind it and put it in a pill. But most of our medications derive themselves from plant life still, which is like a physical component of plants, but mental health, right? I've heard so much about people find healing for emotional and mental health issues around plants. Mm-hmm. Talk to me a little bit about how that works.
Yeah. And here we also, again, have multiple levels. We have the medicine level, like you just mentioned, right? Plants have a whole series of different characteristics. Their chemical makeup in their bodies allow for certain properties that can be used by the human body in order to deal with certain types of situations. We also have the fact that plants use multiple different ways to communicate and to share out these characteristics, these healing characteristics that they have. They can use chemical signals, they can use electrical signals, they can use, liquids and parts of their body and all these types of aspects for nourishment. So one of the fascinating areas that we're really diving deeper into is the fact that even, you see it in things like forest therapy and forest bathing, which is that when I spend time in nature, even just spending 20 minutes in a natural setting, and this could be even a city park, but where what I'm mostly seeing around me are the environment in a more natural setting. Just in those 20 minutes, my cortisol levels, my stress levels drop by 50%. And there's a whole series of different factors as to why. Some of it is related to the terpenes, so these volatile organic chemicals that the plants release into the air, specifically trees mainly. And these are kind of what you experience in aromatherapy, what you experience when you smell an orange or when you smell that pine smell. All of these organic compounds actually react in the physical body through a series of chemical reactions that enhance our own healing effects. They enhance what's called natural killer cells, which are these cancer fighting cells within our body. They enhance all these different, they relax us. They drop that stress level. They help us clear our minds. And then they start a process of natural healing within the body. They sort of trigger this. So you have one aspect that's purely physiological and chemical. You have another one that is being studied a lot now, which is to me one of the most fascinating, which is the power of awe and wonder in healing. So, for example, people who they've done studies in multiple cities. They've done studies in, I think it was in Philadelphia, and there's been some studies of these similars in Denmark and other cities where they took vacant lots in a city area, and some of them were left completely as they were, trashed and whatever. Some of them were cleaned up so they were nice and orderly. And some of them were thrown, nature was allowed to grow randomly there. In other words, they kind of put, wild plants and let wild plants grow. So it became like a little green oasis. And invariably, the ones that had more of these green oases, people who lived closer to these little green plots, actually found that there was lower levels of mental health illness, depression. There was just everything related to mental wellness was improved. And part of this, is awe and wonder. The walking by these and triggers a sense of awe and wonder at how are these plants growing here? Or, ooh, how beautiful. Or let me stop and look at this. And, ooh, look at that little flower. And all of those have been proven to actually increase our mental wellness and our mental health. And so, here you have multiple ways where a relationship with nature, either immersion and, breathe in all of those terpenes, or whether it's just visual. So even just having the image of a tree outside of the window in a hospital has been shown in the ICU units, to lower and to reduce the amount of time that you are in recovery, after having surgery, for example. Just being able to stare out at natural settings reduces the amount of time I spend in recovery units. So there is a reciprocal relationship, a sort of, you can see a resonance, because we are nature. We forget this. We forget that not only can we see nature, outside of us, we can participate in nature, we can do things immersed, but then the most important is we are nature. So when I spend a lot of time with plants, that resonance within me helps me on a physical level, my body reacts, and on a mental level, my emotional state changes.
I love it. Yeah, that makes total sense when you explain that. It's funny because I don't think we're cognizant of it. And then to hear you say it, you're like, oh yeah, when my mom was in the hospital, I was like, oh, I want her to have a window with a nice view. What is a nice
Exactly.
view? It's plants and trees and things like that, right? Like, versus just the gray sky outside or the blue sky, right? Which is
Or
nice,
the
but
concrete, parking lot.
yeah, or a view of the next hospital building right across the
Exactly.
way.
And
Yeah.
that's it. Those are the things that if we stop, and again, always going back to the whole plant slowing down and assessing, is if we stop that, we actually have the answers within us, right? Because again, we are nature. We have a plantness inside of ourselves. We have a natural side. If we give ourselves permission to sort of embrace that, to step into it, to
Hmm.
explore it more, then all of a sudden, look at that. Like it becomes more clear. You're like, oh yeah, of course I want a room with a view. Well, what does the view do for me? The view makes me sit in awe and wonder. The view makes me slow down and watch. The view makes me take notice and become more aware. The view helps me better understand the environment in which I'm in. All of
Hmm.
these aspects are what keeps our mental and our physical health high.
I love it. It just makes total sense. As we're learning, right? I'm learning so much. I mean, I think it's like I listen to how you're explaining this, and I'm like, I knew that, but I
Right.
wasn't like aware of it,
Right.
right? Like, and then I'm like, oh, she's just bringing forward like things that are just so buried because I'm not paying attention to it, right? I just don't have my attention on it. Um, Leadership lessons from plants. I want to make sure, right, that we touch on that. What are some things plants can teach? People that are leading companies, or because I don't think they look to the the leadership people. They read books. They're constantly on this self-fulfilling prophecy journey, and they want the magical answer, and they listen to the unicorn podcast because I drop pearls of wisdom. um, what could they learn from just being aware of with and in tune with plants?
Right. So there's lots of different things. There is the nature kind of based part, which is everything I was just talking about, right? The to be a leadership, like if I need people to be de-stressed, how do I create my environment? How do I design with what's called the biophilic design, which biophilia is love of life, love of nature. It's an inherent, innate need that we as human beings. So one part of it is the physical. How do I create an environment that operates more like an ecosystem? Right? How do I create a physical environment that triggers those feelings that I get when I'm inside of an ecosystem? I'm really working within an ecosystem. So that brings up the fact that we know that from a physical design perspective, filtered lights, all the things that a plant would thrive with are actually what we as humans would thrive with also. So that is one first place. The other part is ecosystem thinking is also looking at all of life as individuals within systems and systems that interlock inside of one another. So as a leader, I need to better understand what are all of my what's called ecotones, so all the borders around me, and what do those borders do? Because borders around my ecosystem, so it's the area that I'm leading, have a lot of nourishment and a lot of like experimentation that happens. And so there's characteristics that these have that I can employ. But within it, I have to think that a functioning ecosystem has an entire series of different things, which means enough individuality for an individual species or person in this particular case to feel empowered, to feel like they can thrive, and yet enough relations, and specifically mutually beneficial relationships, which is mutualisms is the majority. We try to think that competition is normal, but it's actually not. In reality, in nature, competition is a very small part, and it's usually time limited because competition means that usually one dies off. So we can't always be competing. We'll spend all of our energy. So competition in healthy doses and understanding when to employ competition, when to employ, for example, predation, when to employ instead parasitism. And more importantly, the bulk of my stuff is what are the characteristics of mutually beneficial relationships? Because in reality, they have a certain characteristics that we forget. It's not just we both do things and we get a benefit. It's more than that. we get a benefit because there are, for example, I have an excess of something. So I give you my excess and you give me your excess. So I'm not draining myself to give you something, or I'm not spending all my time producing something to give you. So there's a lot of other characteristics that we can look at. We can also look at that from the awareness. We can work with plants to understand better, how do I assess with more accuracy what my environment is like? What are the different mechanisms that are necessary for my feedback loops? What are most of the mechanisms necessary for me to understand which are the data points that are most important to reach? So there's a whole, and remember, it's an ecosystem. So my data point is connected to somebody else's data point, is connected to somebody else's kind of point, is connected to. So what are all of these chains of connections? How do they overlap? And then how do I carry out my individual function within this? So it's kind of this flipping on its head a misconstrued notion. Darwin never said survival of the fittest. So Darwin said survival of the fit. What is an organism that is fit, adapted for their environment? And that's a big thing leaders can learn, which is what does adaptability and resilience really look like in a shared ecosystem? And that's a really big one, so that you don't ever try to create fittest, which implies one, but instead fit, which implies relationships that are thriving.
I love it. Yeah. Obvious, great, lessons for anyone to self-improve, right? Leader or not. So you do pivoting a little bit to kind of how you help folks, right? How you bring all this kind of knowledge and all your studies and such to bear. So we talked about that you speak on these topics, but you also are available through the website. You do coaching, you do mentoring. Maybe talk just a little bit about how you engage with folks that want to learn more or connect with you.
Yeah. So as a nature-inspired mentor, I use kind of traditional coaching techniques. So the idea of helping reflect more self-awareness. So if I am your ecosystem, then I want to reflect back to you as an individual. What is it that you're experiencing in that ecosystem, so that you can more easily see it and start to develop your own awareness around it? So I use techniques. I founded the Naturally Conscious Community, which is a community off the traditional social networks, where we're able to explore more fully the idea of, if we're living in this shared ecosystem, and if we want to really be conscious, so aware of everything that we do, but in a way that feels comfortable and natural. Because I work a lot with multi-potentialites. I love people who have lots of passions, because I do not believe in this idea of focus. Because the nature-inspired approach doesn't say you should only have one passion or follow one passion. It says you can have lots of passions, but you only have a few deep patterns. So there's an entire sort of nature-inspired approach in order for you to better understand who you are, who you want to be, and what is the contribution that you want to make to the ecosystem in which you're a part of. Because that's really what it is. It's, how do I form better relationships? How do I create an ecosystem that flourishes? What is my role in that ecosystem? And really, what is it that ecosystem, how does that ecosystem relate to other ecosystems? So all of these different pieces. So as a mentor and a coach, my job is to be a mirror, to be your support, and to be kind of your holding that space, and to give you that self-permission, to help you reach that self-permission where you explore without the constraints of human thinking. So I tend to, especially because of my spiritual background mixed with my nature-inspired background, is really about, there are no rules. Those are all human constraints that we don't really need. What's most important is for us to understand, what is it that, who you are, what's your true nature, what do you want to become, and how does that interact with your ecosystem?
Yeah, that awareness, oftentimes, like I said, right? Like the things that you were talking about, I was like, I know that, I just wasn't aware, right?
Exactly.
I wasn't paying attention to
and
it.
Then from the step of awareness, then it's using it. So helping people really get to the plant. So I work with a lot of people who kind of the idea of professional and personal sort of intermingle. So naturepreneurs, nature-inspired professionals, healers, creatives, especially people with a lot of creativity, where life and professionalism tend to blur together. And I always say that I am what I do and I do what I am. And so I want that all to be fun, thriving, and flourishing, really, like really with high mental health, with high levels of physical health, like all those pieces. So the people that I work with, people who come to me, are usually because they want to really feel in tuned with their overall environment.
I love it. So for those, again, following along at home, the website will be down below. I encourage you to take What is Your Spirit Wild Plant. Mine, I'm going to butcher the name, was, I'll just share, was purslane. And when I look at it, I'm like, oh, I've seen that before. And then I'm like, but I never knew what it was, right? Now I'm more in tune with it, which is cool. How many different plant types are part of the quiz result?
The quiz? There's 5 in the quiz.
Okay.
I wanted to, when I designed the quiz, I started working with dandelion. I was working really closely with dandelion, and then every one of the plants sort of appeared to be in different things. So like, there's chickweed and there's purslane and there's other plants, and they're all wild plants, AKA weeds, because wild plants are extremely resilient. They have really unique personalities. They can be found pretty much everywhere. And they are plants that, are extremely useful to human beings as food and as nutrition, but also in their deep wisdom, because again, we've been trying to kill them for years. And have you ever tried to kill a dandelion? It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. They have a built-in fail-safe. So do all the others. So these are all plants that know what it means to really let their wild side flow.
Yeah, the 2 things that'll probably be here after the end of the earth will be cockroaches and dandelions, right?
Exactly. So all of these wild plants, some of them more visible like the dandelion, some of them less visible like the purslane. But purslane, like you said, when you look at it, you're like, hey, I was walking down a city street and I've seen those like growing out of the sidewalk cracks. And that's exactly what I wanted, which is the really waking up to that plant blindness of understanding that all these plants are there. And that's a representative of you, like of understanding where you are in your life.
I love it. Yeah, the website's really cool. I really encourage people, while we've been talking and you've just been, reawakening awareness in me. There's just so many cool things to click on and kind of explore and learn all the different communities. The reviews are really cool. There's some powerful statements by people who you've had the honor of touching and helping improve either their business or in a lot of cases their lives, right? There's really cool statements on there. So I encourage everyone to go check it out. I'm jealous that you're in Northern Italy and I'm in Phoenix, Arizona.
Pretty soon we're going to be switching paths because I'm actually heading to the United States for a month and you're heading to Europe. So
yes,
we'll be switching.
It'll be awesome. That's cool. And we didn't get to talk about the circus, which makes me sad, but
it's okay. It just gives you more reasons for another call. The circus was definitely fun. Both my circus as well as Cirque du Soleil, very different entities.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I was very sad in the U.S. when one of our customers is, the company that owned Ringling Brothers, Barnaby Bailey out here that decided to hang it up for a while. They are Feld Entertainment. They're one of our customers. And I get an opportunity to kind of watch all the cool stuff that they're doing as they're remaking themselves and retransforming. It's all about monster trucks right now. But
which, some of the animal stuff that Ringling Brothers have done, it's good for it to retire. But Feld also does all the ice rings things, right? All the ice shows.
Yeah.
When I worked on Cirque, we had plenty of people who originally were from the Feld world. So that was a fun exchange. We've seen a lot of Feld shows while we were traveling with Cirque.
That's good. Yeah, it's a great, people want to be entertained, and Feld has that at their core and their mission. And the circus was probably time. I thought they could have done it, just lose the animals and still do the circus. People still would have came, I thought, but maybe, I'm sure they know it better than I do. So, well, thank you so much for taking the time, raising my awareness, sharing all the knowledge, giving us some great tips on just awareness around plants. I almost want to say plants are people too.
They are people. That's good. There's an entire movement for plant personhood. So plants are people. This is a good thing that you said. See how it naturally comes out of us? That's
it. Yeah. I always feel bad whenever, even if I kill a weed, right? That I'm like, oh, I got to pull this. I always feel like horrible. Like I just pulled this thing. Like this is a living thing that I am killing because I don't, for whatever reason, I'm being socially judged that it's a weed and not a living thing, and I'm not caring for it. And it bothers me. It's
well, when you start working with Purslane, Purslane will help you without any doubt better understand that. And that's the other reason why I chose wild plants to work with rather than like traditional flowers and house plants, because that's one of the first things I hear. Like from people, it's like, well, how do I weed my garden or whatever? And I said, there are ways to do it. There is a relationship that's happening. There is an understanding that we as humans need something. So I have no doubt that Purslane will take you on a journey so that you better understand weeding.
I love it. Very cool. Well, thank you. Thank you so much again for spending the time, being a guest on the podcast, and sharing all your knowledge. And it's just been awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. I look forward to the next time when we talk about circus arts.
There we go.